And gestured languages are alive and well in modern times too. The World Federation of the Deaf estimates that worldwide, over 70 million people use sign as their native language. That's a lot. That's more than the number of native Italian speakers. In this lecture, we'll talk about this often overlooked form of language, this signed language. And I have two goals. By exploring a version of language that operates in a different modality than speech, I'll try to give you a wider and deeper appreciation of what language is. And in doing that, I'll also try to dispel some of the big myths about sign language, with the hope that you can educate others about this fascinating form of communication. When you hear that over 70 million people use sign as their native language, you might be tempted to think that they're all using the same basic language, just like people speaking different dialects of English all around the world. This is the first major myth of sign language. Many people are surprised to learn that, in fact, signers around the world are using quite distinct languages. It's hard to know how many active sign languages there are, but estimates range from 200 to 300. And these languages are largely mutually unintelligible. As the president of the International Society for Gesture Studies, I gave the opening address to our 2018 conference in Cape Town. As I spoke, I was flanked by 3 interpreters signing in 3 different languages: American Sign Language, British Sign Language, and South African Sign Language. This was not just for show. These interpreters were necessary, absolutely necessary, because the languages are so different. Even within a sign language, there can be major variations. Have you ever been to Scotland and traveled between Edinburgh and Glasgow? These cities are about 40 miles apart, and even though the speakers from both cities use English, their accent and vocabulary can sometimes make it seem like they're speaking 2 different languages. It's similar with sign language. Both cities use British Sign Language, but my colleagues tell me that when they travel between Edinburgh and Glasgow, they have to pack a different set of signs. Now, before we dive in and talk about the linguistic nature of sign language, let me just remind you of some history. In a previous lecture, you learned that as recently as the 1960s, many people, including those in the medical community, did not view sign language as a real language. In fact, most governments around the world have only just recently recognized sign language as a legal national language. In America, at least, a big part of this view stemmed from the long tradition of oralism in deaf education. In the late 19th century, there was a push to try to assimilate deaf individuals into hearing culture, and this led to a heavy emphasis on lip reading and speaking in deaf education. By the way, do you know who was the most vocal and prominent advocate of oralism in America? Alexander Graham Bell, the inventor of the telephone. That's interesting. Needless to say, the oralist tradition greatly marginalized the signing community. I mean, imagine being part of a group where your government doesn't officially recognize your language and the medical community declares it unhealthy for your children to learn it. I share this history to give you a sense of why it took so long for science to embrace sign language as a real language. Don't get me wrong, there was excellent research on sign done before the 1970s, but up to that point, larger social forces kept it out of the mainstream scientific view. So let's start by breaking down sign language according to our 5 linguistic components: pragmatics, syntax, semantics, morphology, and phonology. And for each, we can think about the relevant linguistic universals. Starting first with pragmatics. I don't think there's ever been any doubt about the social use of signing. It's pretty clear that the deep need to share information with other humans has always been a driving force in the use of sign. Think back to the home sign systems by the deaf children in Taiwan and America, or the creation of the new sign system in the Asaid Bedouin deaf community in Israel. There are many other historical examples as well. You might be surprised to learn that there was a flourishing community of signers on the island of Martha's Vineyard from the early 1700s to the mid-1950s. Historical records suggest that Martha's Vineyard Sign Language came from an earlier sign language in England called Old Kent Sign Language. The language flourished on Martha's Vineyard because of the unusually high number of deaf people who lived there and its acceptance among the hearing community. The fact that it was used by both hearing and deaf people alike for so long is a testament to the powerful social drive to connect through language. It's useful to see how this pragmatic use of sign reveals the linguistic universal of specialization. Remember, specialization refers to the fact that all languages are designed to intentionally communicate. It's not like a signer just throws up a bunch of gestures out there and sees which ones stick. It's not like a sloppy game of charades. No, signs are highly specific and reproducible, just like any other signaling convention we use. And just like any other conventional signal, this suggests a tacit understanding that the signals will be mutually understood to have specific and reliable meanings. This brings us to the semantic component of sign language, which involves the meaning of words. Recall that in the Saussurean tradition, words not only serve as symbols for things, but as arbitrary symbols. Think back to our example of that big shiny thing in the sky. The English word for sun and the French word soleil are both arbitrary in their relationship to the concept of the sun. This highlights the second big myth about sign. Sign languages have zero arbitrariness. Not true. Take the American Sign Language word for sunlight. It's a small, one-handed circular gesture off to the side of the head, and then you open your hand towards your face. Now, that seems pretty iconic, right? But still, why the particulars? Why not have the hand directly overhead? Or why not make a fist instead of a circle? Or why not have the open hand move closer to the eyes? Even with signs that are highly iconic, like this one, there are always arbitrary elements. Let's take a much less iconic example. I'm going to describe a sign from ASL, and I want you to guess what it is. Ready? I take two hands and put them in the thumbs down position, right in front of my chest. And then I make two circular motions with one hand starting upward and the other starting downward. Any idea what that means? It means science, of course. Where's that meaning coming from? Some believe that the sign iconically demonstrates putting chemicals in different beakers. But even if that's true, that's still an extremely arbitrary choice. I mean, there's a lot more to science than chemicals and beakers, right? This is the essence of what Saussure meant by arbitrary. It really doesn't matter what form a symbol takes as long as all language users see how it differs from other forms of other symbols. It's the differentiation, not the particular form, that matters. So just like spoken language, sign language has a mixture of arbitrariness and iconicity. What's interesting is that the balance is different for the two forms of language. Speech is heavier on arbitrariness and sign is heavier on iconicity. This makes sense when you think about what each modality affords. The hands are great at visually and spatially capturing information. And because many word meanings can be visualized in space, either directly or metaphorically, signs can invest more in iconicity. But speech sounds are different. They are not nearly as good at capturing imagery or spatial information, so it's much more natural for speech to break from iconicity. This opens the door to much more arbitrariness in speech. Putting this together, the big takeaway message is that signed and spoken languages each have elements of arbitrariness and iconicity, so both are symbolic in the Saussurean sense. So let's turn to the rule-governed and generative universal of language. When it comes to morphology and syntax, a third big myth about sign is that it basically borrows its grammar from spoken languages. There's no question that spoken languages influence sign languages, but sign has many unique grammatical features too. Let's take a different sign language as an example. Auslan is the imported sign language used by the Australian deaf community. It was brought to Australia by British and Irish deaf signers in the 19th century, and it differs from English in many ways. For example, whereas English pluralizes objects by adding the morpheme s to the ends of words, Auslan signals plurality in different ways. Sometimes it uses a numeral sign preceding the object, as in 5 book, and sometimes it repeats the sign for the object corresponding to the number of the object, like making the sign for beer 2 consecutive times to order 2 beers. And if you repeat the sign 3 times, it means many. Past tense is also different. English adds the morpheme ed to regular verbs to indicate an event that happened in the past. Auslan has no such marker, but instead begins the sentence with a temporal statement and then describes the event, as in, week past, I wash my car. Auslan also differs compared to English on syntactic word order. In English, it means 2 very different things to say, woman likes man and the man likes woman. But in Auslan, the order is much more flexible. It could be this order, woman like man, or the signer could use an eyebrow raise to syntactically mark the man as the direct object. So it could be man, eyebrow raise, woman like, or like man, eyebrow raise, woman. This example highlights the 4th myth about sign language. It's all about the hands. Not so. Back in 2012, Michael Bloomberg gave several press conferences as mayor of New York about the administration's response to Hurricane Sandy, the worst storm to hit the metropolis in decades. At the podium, the mayor was joined by an ASL interpreter named Lydia Callis. Callis mesmerized TV audiences. Many people had never been exposed to so much signing, and Twitter seemed particularly taken by Callis's animated and assorted facial expressions. But contrary to what most people thought, these